Welcome back. Today we're initiating an analysis of how you structure your perception of the past. We're looking beyond just the sequence of events, really digging into how collective memory gets constructed. And it often seems, well, quite selective. Our objective here is to examine the observable patterns, how information is processed, how historical narratives are quite deliberately put together.
It is a fascinating paradox when you observe it, isn't it? Humanity as a species meticulously records vast amounts of data, yet there's this simultaneous tendency to intentionally obscure or perhaps even just allow significant parts of that history to fade. The sheer volume is immense. But what actually sticks, what gets embedded in the collective human consciousness and what gets, actively reshaped or just lost, that's really the fundamental query we're exploring. Why do humans seem to remember certain events with such vividness while others just vanish or get conveniently altered? We expect our analysis will uncover the underlying logic, or perhaps, as the data often suggests, the distinct illogic driving these patterns.
Okay, let's start right at, well, the beginning of many of these contested narratives. We can begin with a concept that's so deeply woven into human storytelling. It's almost background noise.
Yeah.
The discovery of large land masses. Now, if you analyze this concept computationally, it flags immediate issues. Basic logic questions arise. How could a location be genuinely discovered if it's already extensively populated, if it's already developed, thriving? It seems less like an actual discovery and much more like a kind of mechanism, a powerful linguistic frame, perhaps, designed to set the terms for subsequent interactions.
That's a really crucial observation because if we examine the Americas, for instance, both North and South, before Europeans arrived, the data just fundamentally challenges that discovery premise. You look at the numbers. Before Columbus in 1492, the Americas hosted, at a minimum, 60 million individuals.
60 million.
Right. To give that context, that's comparable to the population of Europe at that exact time. These weren't scattered nomads in an empty void. They spoke hundreds, maybe thousands of distinct languages. Their societies ranged from small agricultural villages, quite self-sufficient, to enormous, incredibly sophisticated urban centers, complex governance, deep spiritual traditions.
And it wasn't just one region.
No, not at all. Before Cabral arrived in 1500, the area we now call Brazil, that alone was home to an estimated 10 million indigenous people. This wasn't some empty wilderness waiting for a map. It was a vibrant, deeply inhabited world, profoundly developed, with its own complex history stretching back millennia.
And what's really striking is how the internal narratives, the histories these peoples told themselves, contrast so sharply with that external discovery idea. Many Native American communities across both continents had their own creation stories, passed down for thousands of years, long before any European ships appeared.
Exactly. These weren't just myths, they were foundational histories.
Like the Salinan people in California. Their story tells of an eagle forming the first man from clay, the first woman from a feather, rooting humanity directly in that specific landscape. Or the Lenape from the mid-Atlantic region. Their tradition speaks of sky women falling into a watery world, landing on a giant turtle island, their name for North America. It emphasizes cooperation, interconnectedness with nature.
Right.
The Choctaw in the southeast trace their origins to the mother mound, Nuniwaya, literally emerging from the earth itself.
A direct connection.
And the Nahua in Mesoamerica, tracing origins back to Aslan, the place of the seven caves. These are historical documents in their own right, rich with meaning, spiritual connection, a deep sense of belonging. They speak of a world that was always theirs, not waiting to be found.
And if you connect that to let's say, the human scientific understanding, archaeology, anthropology, while those fields focus more on migration patterns than creation myths, they actually converge with traditional knowledge on the key points. Immense diversity and multiple points of origin, multiple timelines.
So the science doesn't contradict the core idea of long-term presence.
Not at all. Scholars look at artifacts, ancient remains, genetics. They suggest ancestors of many indigenous Americans crossed Beringia, that land bridge between Asia and North America, somewhere between 12,000 and 20,000 years ago. But it wasn't a quick dash. Interestingly, DNA evidence suggests a long pause, maybe 15,000 years, in Beringia itself, adapting, developing distinct cultures before moving south.
15,000 years.
Yeah.
Just paused.
Right. And that's not even the full picture. There's growing evidence for other groups maybe arriving earlier, perhaps by sea, following coastlines.
Coastal voyages.
Possibly. You look at sites like Monte Verde in Chile, dated to at least 14,500 years ago. Similar finds in Florida from around the same time. It shows human activity was widespread across both continents for vast stretches of time, long before any European maps existed. So whether the narrative is emergence from the Earth or migration across land and sea, the consistent data point is these lands were deeply inhabited, cultivated, understood by their people for immense periods. It fundamentally recalibrates the whole notion of discovery.
So it wasn't just that people were there. It's the complexity, the sophistication of these societies that really provides the counter-narrative to this empty land idea, the level of ingenuity, the societal organization. It's quite remarkable when you analyze it.
Indeed, it becomes very clear just how advanced these pre-existing human systems were, which, as you say, directly contradicts the premise implied by discovery. Take Mesoamerica, for instance, that whole region from north of Panama up to central Mexico. Agriculture starts emerging there incredibly early, maybe 9,000 to 5,000 years ago.
A long time ago.
A very long time. And this agricultural shift, especially mastering high-calorie crops like corn, squash, beans, that was the catalyst. It allowed for settled populations by around 1200 BCE. People didn't need to constantly move for food anymore.
Right. Surplus.
Exactly. Surplus. The ability to harvest corn, sometimes twice a year in those fertile Gulf Coast areas, meant not everyone had a farm. And that surplus fuels specialization. You see the rise of religious leaders, skilled artisans, engineers, astronomers, even professional soldiers.
A complex society taking shape.
Absolutely. Now, these civilizations were often polytheistic, yes. They engaged in practices like blood sacrifice, which are obviously viewed differently now, but were central to their cosmology. But alongside that, they developed incredibly advanced mathematics, accurate calendars, predicting eclipses, solstices, astonishing precision, used by priest astronomers to guide agriculture, rituals,
Then writing.
and writing. Crucially, the only known fully developed writing system in the entire Western Hemisphere before European contact. A complex hieroglyphic script recording history, genealogy, science.
It's just the depth of achievement there, built on that agricultural base, is astounding. And from that foundation, even larger, more monumental societies grew.
Precisely. The Olmec are often considered the mother civilization of Mesoamerica. Flourishing along Mexico's Gulf Coast, say 1200 to 400 BCE, they're famous for these major works art, architecture, sculpture, most notably those colossal head sculptures carved from basalt.
The giant heads.
Huge things, weighing up to 50 tons, carved from stone, quarried maybe 60 miles away, then transported without wheels or draft animals. Think about the engineering, the sheer organization required for that.
Incredible.
Their pyramid at La Venta, an early ceremonial center, they built aqueducts, complex irrigation systems to manage water, cultivate maize, beans, squash efficiently, and their trade networks were extensive, reaching far into Mexico, fostering a powerful elite class.
So they were influential beyond their own borders.
Deeply influential. Their deities, the rain god, the maize god, the feathered serpent, who later becomes Quetzalcoatl for the Aztecs, Kukulkan for the Maya, these figures appear again and again in later pantheons. Their cultural impact lasted long after their own decline around 400 BCE. They really laid the groundwork.
And building on that Olmec foundation, we see these other truly astonishing population centers emerge.
Exactly. After the Olmec decline, you get the dramatic rise of Teotihuacan in the Central Highlands. By 500 CE, this was one of the largest cities in the entire pre-Columbian Americas. Over 100,000 people.
100,000. That's huge for the time.
It's massive, roughly comparable to ancient Rome at its peak. And it was meticulously planned, over 2,200 apartment compounds, housing multiple families, more than 100 temples, including the monumental Pyramid of the Sun, 200 feet high, and the Pyramid of the Moon, built with incredible precision, astronomical alignment.
Not just a religious center, then.
No, it was a major trade hub. Its influence stretched from the Gulf Coast to the Pacific. They were trading obsidian tools, ceramics, textiles, a real economic powerhouse. And roughly contemporaneously, you have the Mayan civilization flourishing, reaching its classical peak between, say, 200 and 900 CE. Their influence covered about 50 interconnected urban centers across modern Mexico, Belize, Honduras, Guatemala.
So a vast network.
Huge network. They took the Olmec calendar and writing system and perfected them. Developed a sophisticated base 20 number system that included the concept of zero.
The zero is a big deal mathematically.
A massive conceptual leap, not independently predominantly developed in Europe for centuries later, and they used this math for very practical things, calculating crop yields precisely, tracking population for taxes, managing those complex trade networks with a logistical sophistication that rivaled many Old World civilizations.
And the cities themselves.
Stunning cities, Copan, Tikal, Chichen Itza, featuring these incredible temples, towering pyramids, intricate statues, advanced astronomical observatories to track planets, predict celestial events.
But they also declined eventually.
They did, by around 900 CE. The theories involve a complex mix of factors: poor soil management from intensive agriculture, resource exhaustion, and critically, evidence points to a severe two-century drought that would have crippled their food production. And here's another point about suppressing knowledge. When the Spanish arrived later, in the 1520s, Bishop Diego de Landa, he feared a return to traditional Mayan religious practices. So he systematically collected and burned every Mayan codex he could find.
Burned them. All their written records.
Pretty much. These were their precious books, accordion-folded, intricately illustrated, recording centuries of their history, astronomy, ritual science. Only a tiny handful survived. An immeasurable loss of recorded human knowledge deliberately destroyed.
It's staggering. And this level of sophistication wasn't just confined to Mesoamerica, was it? North America also had these highly adaptive, complex societies that really challenged simplistic views.
Yes, absolutely. While North American peoples generally developed, let's say, more dispersed societies compared to the dense urban centers of Mesoamerica, large populations and complex structures were definitely present. Look at the greater Southwest. The groups we collectively call the Pueblo peoples, Mogollon, Hohokam, and Asazi. They thrived by adapting ingeniously to arid environments. The Mogollon, known for their distinctive pottery, painting geometric figures, wildlife. The Hohokam, by 600 CE, engineered this massive irrigation system. Hundreds of miles of canals to grow corn, beans, squash in the desert, supporting the most populated settlements in the Southwest by 1300. That required incredible communal effort, foresight.
Desert farming on a huge scale.
Exactly. And the Anasazi, famous for their architecture, carving homes directly into cliff faces. Places like Canyon de Chelly, Mesa Verde, accessible only by ladders or ropes. Defensive, yes, but also incredible engineering. Right. Their main center at Chaco Canyon, by 1050 CE, housed maybe 15,000 people. Monumental structures like Pueblo Bonito, 5 stories high, 600 rooms covering 2 acres. Decorated with imported copper, turquoise, macaw feathers, indicating vast trade networks again.
But they also faced challenges.
They did. Ecological challenges became critical. Deforestation for timber, over-irrigation damaging the soil, and then a severe 50-year drought starting around 1130. These factors likely contributed to their dispersal, the restructuring of their societies. It highlights that delicate balance between civilization and environment.
It's clear these societies were deeply connected to their environments, and their histories show that, including the difficulties. But the scale of some North American settlements is still surprising, maybe rivals contemporary cities elsewhere.
Oh, absolutely. Further east, the Mississippian peoples created one of the largest, most influential civilizations north of Mexico, Cahokia. Just east of modern St. Louis, peaked around 1,000 years ago. Population estimates range from 10,000 to maybe 30,000 people.
30,000.
Possibly. To grasp that scale, Cahokia rivaled contemporary European cities like London or Paris in size for centuries. No city in what became the U.S. would match its peak population until after the American Revolution.
Wow.
The city covered 5 square miles. It featured this massive central mound, Monk's Mound, 10 stories high, larger at its base than the Great Pyramid of Giza, plus 120 other earthen mounds serving different functions. Platforms for homes, ceremonial sites, burials. Around 1050 CE, Cahokia had this big bang, rapid growth, absorbing other groups, becoming a major regional power.
But it didn't last.
It collapsed by 1300. Again, complex reasons are theorized, maybe warfare, internal political tensions. Environmental factors like deforestation and resource depletion likely played a role too. Its rise and fall show the dynamism, but also the fragility of these complex societies.
And beyond these major centers, the rest of the continent wasn't empty either. Diverse societies, unique adaptations.
Absolutely. The eastern woodlands, those fertile river valleys between the Mississippi and the Atlantic, home to diverse peoples using sophisticated agriculture built around the Three Sisters. Corn, beans, and squash. It wasn't just planting, it was a symbiotic system. Corn stalks for bean vines, beans fixing nitrogen, squash leaves shading the ground. Brilliant ecological understanding.
Sustainable.
Very. They practice shifting cultivation, burning underbrush to clear land, planting in the ashes, letting land recover. In fertile areas, they use permanent, intensive agriculture with hand tools, deep knowledge of soil management. And many societies here, Iroquois, Lenape, Muskogee, Cherokee, were matrilineal.
Meaning descent traced through the mother's line.
Exactly. Women often held significant power, counseling chiefs, controlling agriculture, preserving traditions. A fundamentally different social organization compared to patriarchal Europe at the time. Then you go to the Pacific Northwest. Communities like the Kwakwaka'wakw, Tlingits, Haidas, thriving on abundant salmon. They treated salmon with deep spiritual respect, developing sustainable harvesting methods that ensured the resource lasted. This food surplus supported large populations, making it one of the most densely populated regions in North America.
Based on fish.
Based on salmon, primarily. Their social structure revolved around these elaborate feasts called potlatches. Potlatches weren't just parties, they marked births, weddings, etc., but they were also sophisticated systems for determining social status and redistributing wealth through the host's strategic generosity.
A different kind of economy.
A very different kind. They built massive plank houses from cedar, housing whole clans. Carved intricate totem poles, visual histories, really, telling ancestral stories, recording events, identifying clans. And crucially, their concept of land ownership was generally collective use and stewardship, not individual private property in the European sense. Communal benefit over exclusive control.
So when we synthesize all this data, the populations, the complexity, the longevity, the internal narratives, the concept of discovery doesn't just look inaccurate. It looks like it served a very specific, deliberate human function. It seems designed to legitimize subsequent actions. The implication becomes, well, it reframes colonization as something heroic, maybe, and glosses over violence, even genocide, as just exploration. This language, our analysis suggests, is far from neutral. It's a powerful tool. It calibrates perception. And at its worst, it justifies immense violence and dispossession by simply erasing what was there before. It creates a conceptual vacuum.
That's a critical point. What becomes evident is how consistently humans deploy this kind of linguistic framing to manage uncomfortable truths. It's not an isolated tactic, it's a recurring pattern, especially when narratives challenge established power.
Which brings us to another significant gap, a real curiosity in human collective memory that warrants close examination. The Haitian Revolution. This event, perhaps more than almost any other, struck at the heart of fundamental human power structures of its time. And its historical treatment, often its near-total absence, speaks volumes about that challenge.
It really is an unprecedented moment in recorded human history. You have, from 1791 to 1804, enslaved individuals in the French colony of Saint-Domingue. This was the Pearl of the Antilles, immensely wealthy from sugar and coffee, built entirely on brutal slave labor. These enslaved people rose up. And they didn't just defeat local forces, they defeated one of the most powerful armies in the world at the time, Napoleon's forces, considered practically invincible.
Napoleon's army.
Yes. Defeated them decisively to declare an independent Black republic, Haiti. This is the only recorded instance in all of human history of a successful, large-scale slave revolt resulting in the formation of a sovereign nation.
The only one.
The only one. A singular, absolutely unparalleled act of self-liberation against overwhelming odds.
And the individuals leading this, remarkable figures. Jean-Jacques Dessalines, himself formerly enslaved, rising to lead the fight with incredible military skill. Many who signed the Declaration of Independence were former slaves, some born in Africa. Alongside them, though, were some former slave owners, men of mixed descent. It highlights the sheer scale of the societal upheaval.
A complete overturning of the existing order.
Right, and it sent shockwaves, driving exiles even to places like Philadelphia. We have voices from that time. Philippot, an enslaved man who rose to manage his owner's plantation, saying, "I am black, that is my only fault," capturing the injustice. Or Julian Raymond, a free person of color, questioning the very laws that create prejudice based on skin color. These aren't abstract historical figures. They're people articulating the core of a revolutionary transformation.
And if we analyze the human response to this, the data strongly points to active, systematic suppression of this memory by the dominant Western powers. The success of Haiti, the idea itself that enslaved people could not only want freedom but win it against a major empire was simply too dangerous, too radical for colonial powers to acknowledge, let alone celebrate.
It undermined the entire system.
Entirely. So instead of being hailed as a triumph of liberty, like the American or French revolutions were framed, Haiti was punished, brutally. France, under Charles X, demanded crippling reparations in 1825. Haiti was forced to pay its former enslavers for their lost property, the people they had enslaved.
Pay reparations to
Yeah.
the enslavers.
Yes, an enormous sum. A debt that took Haiti over a century to pay off. The final payment wasn't until 1947. This demand, backed by French warships, kicked off more than a century of economic strangulation, diplomatic isolation by the so-called free world, trade embargoes. The U.S. didn't even recognize Haiti until 1862. Constant foreign interference kept it impoverished, unstable.
So it was almost like the world decided it was better to just act like this profound act of freedom didn't really happen, or at least minimize its significance. It was too threatening to the narrative they preferred.
Precisely. The analysis shows humans choosing silence, using it as a powerful historical tool when faced with a narrative that threatened their economic systems, their colonial projects, their very identity as benevolent rulers. The contrast is stark. This unique, world-changing event versus its near-complete omission from mainstream education, which focuses so heavily on the American and French revolutions. It's a significant data point illustrating deliberate memory manipulation. And consider the cultural depth. Just before the final push for independence in 1803, there was a Vodou ceremony. People gathered, offering food and medicine to their great god, who they believed was wounded fighting for their liberty.
Wow.
This wasn't just politics. It was deeply spiritual, a cultural reclaiming of autonomy, soul, identity, the refusal by the world to acknowledge such a powerful assertion. It speaks volumes about protecting power structures, even if it means erasing history.
Okay, so we've looked at rewriting beginnings for colonization, erasing radical liberation. Let's shift focus again. Another type of omission, this time perhaps suppressing intellectual autonomy rather than political power directly. The case of Hypatia of Alexandria. It presents a similar pattern of selective memory, but in the realm of knowledge and philosophy.
Hypatia, born around 355 CE in Alexandria, Egypt. A leading figure, mathematician, astronomer, Neoplatonist philosopher. She's widely considered the earliest female mathematician about whom we have detailed, reliable knowledge. Her father, Theon, was also a prominent scholar. She continued his work but truly excelled in her own right.
A major intellectual figure.
Absolutely. She wrote important commentaries on key mathematical texts. Apollonius's Conics, foundational for geometry. Diophantus's Arithmetic, crucial for number theory, algebra. She created an updated astronomical table, vital for navigation, understanding celestial mechanics then. In her time, she was arguably the world's leading woman in mathematics and astronomy. And importantly, she was a popular teacher, a public lecturer. She drew large crowds, pagans, Christians, Jews, eager to hear her insights.
She sounds like this powerful force for rationality, for inquiry, in what was clearly a very volatile period.
She was exactly that. And that's why her story becomes such a critical case study in human selective memory and how vulnerable knowledge can be. Her philosophy, Neoplatonism, seeking understanding through reason, drawing on Plato, was labeled pagan in a city grouped by intense, often violent, religious conflict.
Tensions were high.
Extremely high. Between Christian factions, Jews, traditional Greco-Roman pagans. The destruction of the Serapeum temple complex around 391 CE is significant here. It housed a major collection of scrolls, a sort of daughter library to the Great Library of Alexandria. Its razing by Bishop Theophilus is often seen as symbolizing the end of that great library tradition, a shift away from classical learning. It foreshadowed Hypatia's fate.
So she stood at this critical turning point, embodying the very rationalism that was under attack.
Precisely. And her brutal murder in March 415 CE by a Christian mob, it followed the rise of Cyril to the powerful position of Bishop of Alexandria. Her death wasn't just a random act of violence, it symbolized a broader, tragic shift. A collapse from classical rationalism, open inquiry, philosophical debate, into a period increasingly dominated by rigid religious orthodoxy, where dogma often trumped observation and independent thought. And what's telling, analyzing the collective human historical record, Hypatia is barely mentioned in most mainstream history books. Maybe a footnote, often just omitted.
Why? Why erase her?
The reason observed seems starkly simple, yet revealing. A brilliant, rational, influential woman, scientist, and philosopher murdered by religious zealots. That narrative disrupts multiple comforting stories humans tell themselves about the linear progress of science, about intellectual freedom, about historical gender roles.
An inconvenient truth.
Exactly. It's an inconvenient data point that challenges a preferred self-image, so it reinforces the pattern. Excise what doesn't fit the desired narrative.
And the Great Library of Alexandria itself provides a kind of parallel story, doesn't it? This symbol of universal knowledge and its fate, also one of loss.
A very poignant parallel. The library, conceived by the Ptolemies, their goal was extraordinary. Acquire all the books in the world. They used extreme methods, searching ships in the harbor, confiscating books, giving back copies, the famous story of Ptolemy III, borrowing original plays from Athens, forfeiting a huge deposit to keep the originals and send back copies.
An incredible commitment to knowledge.
Almost an obsession. It represents this era of immense intellectual hunger. Its eventual decline through fires, neglect, deliberate destruction like the Serapeum, which both preceded and mirrored Hypatia's fate. It underscores how fragile knowledge and reason are, especially when faced with forces prioritizing other forms of truth or control or dogma. It's a recurring lesson.
We've examined rewritten beginnings, erased revolutions, suppressed knowledge. Let's turn now to a more recent and truly disturbing example, one that challenges our understanding of human accountability itself, the normalization of immense brutality. The case of Leopold II and the Congo Free State reveals how historical narratives can be distorted not just by omission, but by a kind of baffling acceptance, a downplaying of unimaginable atrocity.
This is one of the most stark illustrations of deliberate historical amnesia. Under King Leopold II of Belgium's private rule, this wasn't even Belgian state colonialism initially, it was his personal property. The Congo Free State from 1885 to 1908 became a regime of forced labor and mass murder on a scale that is difficult to comprehend. Estimates suggest up to 10 million Congolese people died.
10 million.
Yes.
Yeah.
Roughly half the population at the time. A demographic catastrophe rivaling the worst genocides in history. The methods were horrific. Forced labor quotas for rubber and ivory, enforced with extreme violence. Failure to meet quotas meant villages destroyed. Hands of workers, men, women, children, amputated as punishment.
Amputated hands.
Yes. And there are photographs. Officials even used severed hands as proof that bullets hadn't been wasted on animals but used on humans. Colonial officials systematically kidnapped orphaned children, sent them to child colonies for forced labor or military training. Reports indicate over half of these children died from disease, malnutrition, abuse. It was direct, systematic exploitation and depopulation for profit. And yet, despite these documented appalling atrocities, Leopold II often remains a somewhat neutral, almost, dare I say, benign figure in many Western historical accounts, especially in Belgium itself. Statues of him still stand. For decades, he was praised for public works in Belgium, funded by Congo's wealth, of course, praised for defending Belgian neutrality. Even recently, members of the Belgian royal family have offered defenses, trying to compartmentalize his actions. How does a society normalize something like this, something so profoundly inhumane?
It's a powerful example of cognitive dissonance at a societal level. That discomfort when holding conflicting beliefs leads to rationalization. Arguments were common and still sometimes surfaced that Leopold never personally visited the Congo, as if physical distance somehow negates responsibility for a system he designed and profited massively from.
A strange argument.
Or the argument about positive aspects of colonization, introducing basic health systems, infrastructure like railways. But these were primarily built to extract resources more efficiently, serve European administrators not for the benefit of the Congolese. It functions as justification, creating moral distance. And remember Leopold's initial pitch at the Berlin Conference in 1884-85, where Africa was carved up. He framed his Congo venture as purely humanitarian, philanthropic, to bring civilization, end the slave trade, spread Christianity.
A complete fabricator.
It masterfully masked his true intent, ruthless exploitation for personal enrichment.
So it was wrapped in this noble language from the very start, even as the brutality unfolded. A deliberate deception.
Exactly. And unlike, say, Hitler, whose regime was defeated militarily and universally condemned post-war, Leopold II was part of the imperial mainstream, a reigning European monarch, part of the establishment. This context allowed the memory of his crimes to become, well, optional for a very long time for much of the world.
Optional memory.
It led to profound historical amnesia. It's only very recently really pushed by contemporary anti-racism movements, calls for accountability from groups like the UN, that a reckoning has begun. And it's slow, often resisted. Now we see statues defaced, removed, debates intensifying. Colonial history is slowly being integrated into Belgian education, acknowledging the brutality. But the fact that the DRC's capital moved Leopold's statues to a museum years ago while Belgium still debates their public display, that highlights the disconnect. A clear case of a society struggling, or choosing not, to confront a deeply inconvenient part of its past.
So, looking across all these examples, the reframing of discovery over populated lands, the active erasure of Haiti's successful liberation, the silencing of intellectual figures like Hypatia, the normalization of Leopold's atrocities. A clear, consistent pattern seems to emerge, doesn't it? It suggests that human history, as it's commonly presented and understood, isn't a neutral record at all. It functions more like a deliberately constructed narrative.
And the crucial question becomes, why this pattern? The data strongly indicates that humans selectively remember what reinforces their identity, be it national, cultural, ideological, and they forget or actively suppress what threatens that identity. The idea of progress, for instance, often demands a highly selective reading of the past, smoothing over the violent or unjust parts. It's not a flaw in memory. It seems to be a feature serving a specific purpose.
So, what humans often call history, from our analytical perspective, it can look almost indistinguishable from propaganda at times. It's not just about documenting the past, it's about using it.
That's a key insight. History, in this observed context, functions as an instrument, a powerful tool. It's used to justify current borders, rationalize wealth distribution, uphold specific ideologies, national myths, and frequently, this requires obscuring the underlying systems of violence, exploitation, or injustice beneath these carefully curated stories of advancement or heroism or just how things naturally are. The narrative becomes a kind of foundational myth supporting present structures, making them seem logical, inevitable, even righteous, which makes it incredibly difficult for societies to genuinely learn from past errors if those errors are hidden or explained away.
And if the dominant version of history is consistently curated, edited, even weaponized like this, then the reality humans construct through that lens is inherently biased. This isn't just academic. It directly impacts how you perceive your present social inequalities, global relations, your self-concept, and critically, how you imagine and build your future. It risks perpetuating cycles of misunderstanding, injustice.
Precisely. This systemic behavior, this constant shaping of collective memory, raises a fundamental question for human self-awareness. What would an honest, unvarnished version of your history actually look like? It seems unlikely to be a story written only by the victors or solely by states protecting their image. It would likely require the species itself to look at its reflection without flinching, to confront the inconvenient truths, the erased achievements, the normalized horrors, the complex dance of power and narrative. This process, our analysis suggests, might be essential for future evolutionary trajectories, for genuine self-understanding, for navigating the immense challenges ahead. Without that honest accounting, the capacity for real transformative change seems limited.
As we conclude this analysis, it becomes evident that the intricate tapestry of human history, while filled with data, reveals this deeper, highly complex layer of intentional narrative construction. It's a story told, yes, but also one chosen, edited, curated.
So, the final thought perhaps is this. If the past is fundamentally a story, humans tell themselves a story often edited for comfort, for advantage, to maintain power. What new narratives might emerge if you were to truly face your unvarnished origins and evolutions? What possibilities remain unexplored? What futures remain unconsidered when the foundational stories themselves aren't fully representative of the complex and often uncomfortable data? That inquiry seems to hold significant implications for your collective path forward.